Imagine for a moment that every situation you've ever experienced, both the good and the bad, has a special purpose. Sounds incredible, doesn't it? Get ready, because what you'll hear today could transform the way you understand your life forever. Have you ever wondered why certain things happen? Why, at times, does everything seem to fall apart? Maybe you're going through a complicated time right now, and nothing seems to make sense. But what if I told you that none of it is random? God has a powerful message for you today. I am not wrong. Everything happens for a reason. Everything has a divine purpose. Yes, every experience, every obstacle, every closed door is part of a greater plan. At times, we feel as if life is an unsolvable puzzle. But what if you could see your life from God's perspective? Imagine understanding that what ails you now is preparing you for something extraordinary. Are you ready to discover the divine purpose behind every moment? Get ready, because what you will learn today will not only bring hope, but will also fill your heart with a peace that surpasses all understanding. Before we continue, I want you to do something important. Write in the comments, "God, in you I trust." By doing so, you are declaring your faith in the divine plan, even when you do not fully understand it. Dear listener, I invite you to stay with us until the end of this video. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future messages. Number 1. Proverbs 19 verse 21. Many are the plans in the heart of man, but the purpose of the Lord prevails. We are often so focused on our own dreams and goals that we forget that there is a greater purpose at work. This verse reminds us that, though we may make many plans, only God's purpose endures. We all chart paths, dream of a bright future, and set goals for the year, and that is natural. However, we must remember that although our plans are important, they have limits. We only see a small part of the picture, while God sees the big picture. The past, present, and future intertwined in a greater purpose that we cannot fully comprehend. Have you ever made plans that seemed perfect, but suddenly everything fell apart? Maybe you thought you knew exactly where you were headed, but life took an unexpected turn. It happens to all of us. Our plans are not always foolproof. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we choose the wrong paths, and sometimes we face unforeseen obstacles. Although frustrating, these deviations can be signs that God is redirecting us towards something better. Trusting in divine purpose is crucial at such times. It's easy to get discouraged when things don't go as we expected, but remember, God's purpose always supersedes any human plan. Even if we don't understand what's going on, even if it hurts or seems like everything is in chaos, God is working for our good. If we trust His guidance, we will discover that, even if we don't follow the path we planned, we will be on the path we are meant to be on. It is not easy to let go of control. We want to feel secure, to believe we are in control of our lives. But true freedom comes when we surrender our plans to God's purpose. This does not mean giving up dreaming or planning, but being willing to say, "Lord, do your will." Many times, our plans are motivated by ego rather than a genuine desire to follow God. That's where we must stop and ask ourselves, am I pursuing my dreams or God's dreams for me? Finding the balance between our desires and His purpose leads us to better paths. God's purpose is immutable. It does not change with our circumstances or our failures. He knows the beginning and end of our story. Every detail, every unexpected turn, is carefully designed for our good. That constancy gives us peace in times of uncertainty. So when your plans don't work out as you expected, don't despair. God is in control. His purpose prevails. Even if you don't see it now, you can trust that God is leading you to a better future than you could ever imagine on your own. Number 2. Isaiah 46 verse 10. I declare the end from the beginning, from ancient times that have not yet come to pass. I say, my purpose will be fulfilled, and I will do all that I desire. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt overwhelmed because you can't see what's coming in your life? That feeling of uncertainty we've all experienced when we don't know how things will work out or where we're going. But there is something important I want you to remember. God not only knows the future, He declares it. In Isaiah 46 verse 10, God says, I declare the end from the beginning, from ancient times that which has not yet come to pass. Think about that for a moment. God already knows the end before anything happens. He has already seen it. Do you realize how that changes our perspective? While we only see fragments of the present and worry about the future, God sees the whole story in a single glimpse. From beginning to end, He already knows everything. For Him, there are no surprises or unforeseen events. Every event, every unexpected turn in your life, is under His perfect knowledge. Although sometimes we feel that things are out of control, for God everything is clear. But not only that, God not only knows the future, He controls it. His sovereignty is absolute. Nothing happens in the universe that is outside of His plan. Sometimes, when things don't go as we expected, we think that something went wrong or that God lost control, but it is not so. He is in total control of every detail. And this gives us one of the greatest sources of peace. God's plan does not change. He established it from the beginning, and nothing in this world can alter it. This means that, no matter what you face, God's purpose will be fulfilled. You may not always understand it, or it may not make sense at the time, but His will is irresistible. So, even if you experience confusing times, when you don't know if things will work out or if you are on the right path, remember this: God is not confused. What is uncertain to you is clear and perfectly established to Him. His vision is not limited by time or circumstance. He sees everything. When you trust in His perfect knowledge, you can rest, even in the midst of uncertainty. This leads to something beautiful: assurance. You can trust that God's purpose for your life will be fulfilled. No difficulty, obstacle, or doubt can thwart His plan. And best of all, that plan is good. Even if it doesn't always seem that way, even if the road is difficult at times, God has a perfect purpose for you. Holding on to that truth gives you strength to face it all, knowing that, in the end, His will prevail. Therefore, there is hope in God's plan. He already knows your future. He has planned and declared it from the beginning. Even if you don't see how things will work out now, you can be sure that God is at work. His promises will be fulfilled. No matter what you face today, remember that your future is secure in the hands of a sovereign God who sees the end from the beginning. Number 3. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for calamity, in order to give you a future and a hope. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered if your life has a purpose? If difficult circumstances have any meaning, or if it's all just chaos and chance? This verse reminds us of something crucial. God has a plan for you. And it's not just any plan. It's a plan full of well-being, designed specifically to give you a future and a hope. That changes everything. The first thing to remember is that God is in total control. He is not improvising with our lives. Every situation, no matter how complicated it may seem, is under His direction. Nothing is an accident or coincidence. When God spoke these words, He spoke them to the people of Israel in exile in Babylon. They were far from home, feeling that everything they knew was gone. But in the midst of that darkness, God promised them a future full of hope. That message still applies to you today. In your moments of greatest despair, when everything seems to be falling apart, God has a plan. You may not see how this applies to your life today, but look around you. We all face trials that seem to make no sense. However, God is working on something bigger. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected packages. The well-being the Bible talks about is not just comfort or freedom from trouble. It is something deeper: purpose, inner peace, and spiritual growth. The trials we face are tools God uses to prepare us for what is to come. Every challenge has a purpose. Nothing is wasted in God's plan. What He promises in this verse is not an empty hope. His faithfulness is unwavering. The future He promises is filled with peace, fulfillment, and, most importantly, His presence. Even if things don't go as you planned, remember, your story is not over. And the author of your story is God, who promised to give you a future full of hope. Number 4, Romans 8 verse 28. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Let me tell you something that you've probably heard before, but that may not have sunk deep into your heart. God has a purpose in everything that happens to you. I know, sometimes it's hard to believe, especially when life seems like chaos filled with pain rather than joy. However, in Romans 8 verse 28, God gives us an extraordinary promise. In all things He works for the good of those who love Him. And when He says all things, He means literally everything, including those dark moments that we don't understand and that make us wonder, why me? Think about it for a second. Those difficulties you face, those challenges that seem to bring you down, are not accidental. God leaves nothing to chance. You may not see the purpose now. It may all look like a mess, but God is weaving something beautiful behind the scenes. His plan is perfect, even if from our limited perspective we can only see a small part of the canvas. Accepting this truth is not easy. For God's plan to be revealed in our lives, we need to surrender ourselves completely to Him. And this involves trusting, even when we don't understand. It's easy to trust when everything is going well, but what happens when things don't make sense? That's where true faith comes in. Loving God means following His purpose, even when the path is uncertain. Sometimes we feel that God is silent during our trials. But I want to remind you of something important. Even if you don't hear it, God is at work. He does not abandon His children. Every tear, every step, and every seemingly unanswered prayer is part of something bigger than we can imagine. It is crucial to remember that when God works for our good, He is not referring to material things or temporary successes. His plan has a deeper purpose, to mold us into the image of Christ. Have you ever thought that those challenges and losses are designed to make you more like Jesus? Though it hurts, every blow in life sculpts your character and brings you closer to spiritual maturity. Each of us has a unique calling. This divine purpose assures us that even when we don't understand the path, God guides us to that perfect destination. Patience is also key. You may not see immediate results, but I assure you that God is at work. He doesn't make mistakes, and even though the process will be long, His work in your life will be perfect. So the next time you face a test, remember, God leaves nothing to chance. Even in your most difficult moments, He is with you, building something beautiful in your life. Number 5. Psalms 103 verse 19. The Lord has established His throne in the heavens, and His kingdom rules over all. Sometimes we need to remember a fundamental truth, especially when we feel like everything is out of control. God is on His throne, and His kingdom rules over all. This is not just a nice phrase. It is a powerful truth that we find in Psalm 103 verse 19. Think about it for a moment. The Creator God of the universe is seated on His heavenly throne. Nothing escapes His control, not even the smallest details of your life. It is easy to forget this when we look around and see chaos or injustice, but God is still sovereign. Unlike earthly kings, whose decisions are imperfect and whose reigns are temporary, God's reign is absolute and eternal. His throne cannot be challenged, and no force can compete with His authority. Although evil may seem to be winning, God's kingdom stands firm. God is not surprised by what happens in the world or in your life. Every situation is under His supervision. This does not mean that we do not face difficulties, but it does mean that we can rest in His absolute control. Many times, when looking at the earthly powers, it seems that they have the last word. However, true power resides in the heavenly throne. God's kingdom does not change with political decisions or historical events. Moreover, God's justice is perfect. Even though we live in a world full of injustice, we can trust that His justice will prevail, even if it is not at the time we expect. For those of us who belong to His kingdom, this is cause for great hope. As citizens of the heavenly kingdom, we can trust that our King is sovereign. He cares for us and His plan is perfect. This means that no matter what happens, our destiny is in the hands of a loving and powerful God. So, if you are feeling overwhelmed today by what is happening in your life or in the world, remember, God is still on the throne. His kingdom rules over all, and you can rest in His perfect control. Number 6. Psalms 37 verse 5. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act. Let me ask you something. Do you ever feel like the weight of making important decisions falls completely on your shoulders? Those moments when it seems like if you choose wrong, everything could fall apart. This verse offers us a transformative promise for those moments. It's not just advice. It's an invitation to let go of the weight of the world and allow God to take control. What does it mean to commend our way to the Lord? It is not simply saying a quick prayer. To entrust implies surrendering our concerns, aspirations, and desires completely to God, recognizing that, although we may have good plans, we need His divine guidance. Accepting that we do not know everything and that our wisdom is limited, but His wisdom is infinite. However, entrusting is only the first step. Next comes trusting, and this is where many of us face the biggest challenge. Trusting God does not always mean seeing immediate results or understanding what is happening. It is much more than that. It is having the certainty that God is at work, even when we can't see it or things don't go as planned. Let's face it, trusting is more difficult when everything seems to go wrong or when our prayers do not receive the answer we expected. God will act, but in His own way. It is critical to understand that His action does not always coincide with our expectations. His plans are aligned with His will, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. Although we often desire quick solutions, God looks beyond the immediate problem and works on our character, our faith, and our relationship with Him. This requires patience. Waiting on God's timing can be one of the biggest challenges to our faith. We like everything fast, but God calls us to active waiting, trusting that His timing is perfect. As we wait, He shapes us, teaches us, and prepares us. When the time is right, His intervention not only solves our problems, but also brings us closer to His purpose. A daily act of faith. Commissioning our path is not something we do once. It is a daily decision, because each day brings new decisions and challenges. And when we do it, we experience something wonderful, the peace of God. That peace that frees us from stress, that takes away the burden of controlling everything, and that allows us to rest, knowing that He is in control. Imagine living each day with that certainty. God is at work. He opens doors, solves problems you didn't even know existed, and gives you peace in the midst of the storm. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed today, if you don't know what decision to make or are worried about the future, commit your path to the Lord. Trust in Him. Even if you don't see the big picture now, you can be sure of one thing. God is already at work. Number 7, Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own prudence. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. We all face times where we feel like we should be in absolute control, right? It's as if by loosening the reins a little, everything will collapse. But this passage gives us a very different instruction. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own prudence. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will make your path straight. And here is the challenge. Trust God completely, not just in the easy moments or when everything seems to be going well, but with all our heart, without reservation. In theory, it sounds simple, but letting go of that desire for control and the anxieties we carry around can be very difficult, can it? It's like a constant struggle against that urge to figure things out our own way. However, the real key is in letting go. Letting go of our worries, letting go of that need to control every detail. And let's be honest, how many times have we discovered that, despite our best efforts, we can't handle it all? God invites us to total trust, to unconditional faith. When we give Him our hearts completely, we stop carrying a weight that is not ours to carry. For, although we like to think we know everything, our wisdom has limits. We rely on our experience and knowledge, but the truth is that our perspective is limited. God, on the other hand, is infinite in wisdom. He sees the past, the present, and the future, while we barely grasp a fraction of reality. So why not trust the one who has a complete vision? This passage reminds us not to rely solely on our own prudence, but to depend on God's guidance. Acknowledging God in all our ways does not mean turning to Him only in times of crisis or need. It means including Him in every decision, in every step. It means giving Him a central place in our lives, not only when we need Him, but always. When we do, God promises to straighten our paths. This does not imply that life will be easy or that there will be no problems. Rather, it means that even in the midst of difficulties, God will be there to guide us, give us clarity, and, if necessary, correct our course. At times, He will remove obstacles. At others, He will give us the strength to face them. He may even redirect us onto a better path than we had planned. When we truly trust God, that weight of figuring it all out disappears, and in its place we find peace, knowing that He is in control. In practice, trusting God means that, in times of uncertainty, instead of clinging to our solutions, we seek His direction. We change the way we make decisions and begin to include Him in every aspect of our lives, from the smallest to the largest. In doing so, we see how He straightens our paths, guides us on the right path, and transforms our decisions. Divine wisdom always surpasses human wisdom, not because our prudence is worthless, but because God sees beyond it. In the end, recognizing Him in all our ways not only changes our decisions, but our whole life. Number 8. Ephesians 1 verse 11. In Him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of Him who works all things according to the counsel of His will. When we reflect on the fact that we were chosen by God, it is truly amazing. It was not a random act. God chose us out of love, a deep and personal love. His choice was not arbitrary, but part of a carefully designed plan. Each of us has a unique purpose within that divine plan, which gives us an identity and value that transcends any human standard. The idea of predestination can raise questions. What exactly does it mean to be predestined? Predestination is nothing more than God's sovereignty in action. He, in His infinite wisdom, has a sovereign plan for our lives, and we are all included in that perfect design. However, God also gives us free will. Therein lies the balance. God has a perfect plan, but He does not force us to follow it. Rather, He invites us to walk with Him and collaborate in His will. Our growth, our mission in life, everything is connected to that divine call. The thought that God is in control of everything fills us with comfort. Nothing happens outside of His plan. Every event in the universe, every circumstance in our lives, is under His sovereignty. Even in difficult times, when we feel that everything is out of control, God is still sovereign. This certainty should fill our hearts with peace, because even though our circumstances may seem chaotic, God has already written the story. Every detail of our life has a purpose. There are no useless experiences or meaningless situations. Although sometimes it is hard for us to see it in the moment, as we look back we realize how everything fits into a greater narrative. We are part of a divine story, which transforms even the simplest experiences. We no longer live randomly, but walk in God's perfect plan. God's will is a precious thing. Romans 12 verse 2 reminds us that His will is good, pleasing, and perfect. However, trusting it can be difficult when we do not understand it. But that trust gives us security. God does not make mistakes. His will is best for us, even if we don't always understand it right away. Our identity in Christ is strengthened by knowing that we have been chosen by God. We are not just anyone. We are sons and daughters of the King, predestined to fulfill an eternal purpose. Living with that awareness gives us direction and mission. We are not here by chance. We have a divine purpose, and that gives our lives an eternal weight. When we understand this truth, anxiety begins to dissipate. We no longer feel the need to control everything or figure it all out on our own. We rest in God's sovereignty, knowing that He is in control and His plan is perfect. This liberation allows us to stop worrying excessively and trust that God has all the answers that we do not. Our salvation is also woven into this plan. God predestined us not only to be saved, but to be transformed into the image of Christ. His plan includes both our salvation and our spiritual growth and maturity. God is constantly at work in us, leading us into eternity. This certainty is a source of confidence. Our salvation is secured in God's eternal plan, and nothing and no one can snatch us out of His hands. So how do we respond to these truths? We live in the awareness that we have been chosen by God. We seek His purpose in every decision, in every day. In our struggles, we know we are not alone. When doubts come or we face difficult times, let us remember that God has a perfect plan. We are part of His eternal design, and in that we find hope and purpose. Number 9. Job 23 verse 10 says, He knows the path I take. If He tests me, I shall come forth as gold. Imagine for a moment being in the midst of a difficult trial, the kind that seems endless, and you ask, why me? Why now? We've all been there, feeling alone, as if God were far away. However, this verse offers us another perspective. He knows the path I take. This means that nothing you face is random or out of control. God is not only aware of your situation, but He is with you every step of the way. Trials are not accidents. They have a purpose. They are similar to the process of refining gold. The goldsmith does not put gold in the fire to destroy it, but to purify it and make it shine brighter. In the same way, difficulties are not meant to tear you down, but to refine you, to strengthen your faith and character. Every difficult experience you face is designed to bring you closer to God, to make you grow spiritually and prepare you for something greater. This process of transformation is essential. It's not just about holding on until the storm passes, but letting those trials shape you. You may not understand it now, but in the end, you will be stronger, more mature, more prepared to face whatever comes. Like purified gold, the result of this process is priceless. You will reflect more of God's glory, and your life will have far greater spiritual value. We often want trials to be over quickly, but God, like an expert goldsmith, knows exactly how much heat to apply and for how long. He will never allow the process to last longer than necessary. Even if the fire is intense, He will not leave you alone for an instant. His purpose is not to abandon you, but to transform you. Remember, trials are not a sign of abandonment, but opportunities for God to do a work for you. Every detail of your life is under His control. If you trust Him, in the end you will see how every difficult moment had a purpose, how He was preparing you for something greater. The analogy of the goldsmith illustrates this powerfully. Just as the goldsmith watches over the refining process, God is with you, supervising, making sure the result is perfect. He will not leave you in the fire any longer than necessary. If you are feeling overwhelmed today, I want you to remember something. You are not alone. God is with you, guiding every step, even when you don't see it. Everything you face has a divine purpose. In the end, you will come out like gold, stronger, purer, fuller of His glory. This is the hope that sustains us in the midst of trials. God is at work in you, and when it is over, you will be a new creation, brighter and more valuable than ever. Number 10. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. Everything has its time, and everything under heaven has its hour. We have all felt that impatience of wanting things to happen fast. We want dreams to come true now, prayers to be answered immediately, problems to go away. And when it doesn't happen, we get frustrated. We wonder if something is wrong. But Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1 reminds us of a transforming truth. Everything has its time, and everything under heaven that is desired has its hour. This verse teaches us that, though we may long to speed things up, God has a perfect plan, and within that plan, every event happens at the right time. Life, like the seasons of the year, has cycles. We cannot bring summer forward or avoid winter. Likewise, there are times in life that we must simply accept. Every situation we experience has a purpose, even if we don't always understand it. However, we often fight against those rhythms. We want to control, to get ahead, to avoid the uncomfortable. But it is in that struggle that frustration is born. It's not that things are wrong, but that we try to force time instead of trusting God. Waiting is not easy. Sometimes it seems that everything is at a standstill, as if God is not answering our prayers. But waiting on God's timing is not passivity, it is active faith. Every season has a reason. There are times to sow and times to reap, times to move forward and times to stop. God has absolute control over those times. Although we may not always understand, His timing is perfect. Nothing comes before or after, but at the exact moment. In His infinite wisdom, He knows the best time for everything in our lives. Reflect, how many problems do we avoid when we stop rushing things? When we try to force situations, it is easy to make mistakes. But when we trust in God's timing, everything comes when we really need it, not before or after. Perhaps you are now in a stage of waiting, sowing, or facing uncertainty. The important thing to remember is that every stage has its purpose, even the difficult ones. If you are struggling now, know that it is temporary. Just as spring follows winter, difficulties will also pass. The same goes for moments of success and abundance. They are gifts, but they are also temporary. The key is to live each stage without resisting, learning to accept that we do not have total control over time. That frees us from a great burden. Think about how much stress dissipates when we understand that not everything depends on us. There is a greater plan at work, and it is in God's hands. He unfolds it in His way and in His perfect timing. When we trust that process, we find a peace that transcends circumstances. In daily life, this means comfort in uncertainty, remembering that God is working out something perfect. And in good times, we value success and joy as part of the cycle of life. In the end, even if our desires don't materialize immediately, God's plan always comes to fruition at the exact time. And in that trust, we find true peace. Number 11. Isaiah 55 verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts. Sometimes we think we have it all figured out. We believe that if we make enough plans or calculate every step perfectly, things should go as expected. But then something happens that changes everything, and we wonder, why did God allow this? What am I doing wrong? Isaiah 55 verse 8 gives us an answer that may be uncomfortable but is also liberating. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. This means God is telling us that His way of seeing things is completely different from ours. And even if we don't always understand what's happening, His plan is far better than anything we could imagine. Picture this. You're only seeing a small part of a puzzle, but God holds the complete picture. From our limited human perspective, we only see what's in front of us. We focus on the present, our emotions, and what we feel at the moment. But God sees everything from an eternal viewpoint, from a height we can't even comprehend. And you know what? That's incredible. It invites us to let go of control, to accept that we won't always understand, but we can trust that He does. God's ways can sometimes seem confusing or even contradictory to what we've planned. We want to go in one direction, and suddenly everything seems to shift in another. In those moments, we ask, why, God? Why did you allow this? But here's the truth. His ways are higher than ours. What seems like an obstacle or a failure might be exactly what we need to take the next step in our purpose and growth. Every circumstance, even the hardest ones, God uses to shape us, to teach us something we might not have learned otherwise. It's not always about understanding the why in the moment, but trusting that there's a greater purpose behind everything that happens. Let me tell you something. Trusting God when things don't make sense is one of the greatest challenges of our faith. It's easy to trust Him when everything is going well, when everything fits, but what about when you have no answers? What about when life seems chaotic? Those are the moments when our trust is truly tested, and this is where faith comes into play. God is orchestrating something. You might not see it immediately, but it's there. What you can do is rest in the certainty that His wise and powerful hand is guiding your destiny. Isaiah uses an incredible metaphor. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my thoughts higher than your thoughts. This is a visual reminder of the vast difference between our limited understanding and the immensity of God's wisdom. Instead of being frustrated by not understanding this, it should bring us comfort. God sees the big picture. He knows what we don't know, and we can trust that, even if we don't understand it now, His plan is perfect. Acknowledging this leads us to a place of humility. Sometimes we fall into the trap of believing we know it all, that we can control every aspect of our lives, but the reality is our vision is limited. The sooner we accept this, the sooner we can surrender to God's plan. When we stop fighting against what we don't understand and hand control over to God, we find a peace we could never achieve on our own. In practical terms, this means learning to let go of our anxieties when things don't go as we hoped. Instead of worrying, we can remember that God is working for our good, even when we don't see it. Sometimes the path won't be the one we planned, but we can trust that it will be the best path. God's purpose will not be delayed or thwarted. His plan will be fulfilled at the perfect time, and we can be assured that, in the end, it will all be worth it. So, when you find yourself in those moments of uncertainty, when you don't understand what's happening, remember, God's ways are higher than yours. And even if you don't always comprehend it, you can trust that He is leading you exactly where you need to be. Number 12. Romans 11, verse 33 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable His judgments, and His paths beyond tracing out." Sometimes we try to understand everything that happens around us, don't we? We search for answers, logical explanations that bring us peace. But when it comes to God's wisdom, there's something we need to remember. It is beyond our comprehension. This verse makes it clear that the riches of God's wisdom and knowledge are profound and far beyond what we can understand. There is an enormous difference between our limited capacity and God's infinite wisdom. We only see a small part of the story, a fragment of time, while He sees it all, the past, the present, and the future. Everything is clear to Him, while we are just trying to piece together the puzzle of life with the pieces we have. It's easy to get frustrated when we don't understand why certain things happen, but we must remember that God sees the full picture, not just the individual parts. Moreover, the riches of God's knowledge go beyond what we can imagine. God doesn't just understand what we see. He also understands the invisible, what's behind every situation, every decision, every long-term consequence. When he acts, he does so with perfect knowledge, aligned with his divine purpose. What might seem inexplicable or meaningless to us has profound significance to him, perfectly adjusted to his eternal plan. But that doesn't mean it's always easy to accept his judgments. How many times have you felt that things don't make sense, or that what you're going through is unfair? We've all been there, but the reality is that God's judgments are perfect, even when we don't understand them. It's like looking through a foggy glass. We can't see clearly, but he sees everything perfectly. This is where trust comes in. We have to trust that he knows what he's doing, even if we don't. The word unsearchable in this verse means that God's ways are impossible to fully trace. They are so deep and complex that we cannot follow them entirely. And that's a good thing. If we could understand everything God does, he wouldn't be God. His greatness goes beyond what we can imagine. While we are limited by our human vision, he sees everything with an eternal perspective. He knows exactly where he is taking us and why. This is where we need to practice spiritual humility, accepting that we cannot understand everything. Recognizing that God is infinitely wiser than us and that we don't need to have all the answers is liberating. When we stop trying to understand every detail and simply trust in God's wisdom, our relationship with him grows stronger. Sometimes what we need most is to say, God, I don't understand, but I trust that you do. Instead of living frustrated or anxious about what we don't understand, we can live with awe and reverence for God's greatness. Every day is an opportunity to marvel at his wisdom and acknowledge that he knows what we do not. This all leads us to greater worship. When we recognize how great God is and how small our abilities are in comparison, our hearts fill with gratitude. So, when things don't make sense or you're facing a difficult situation to understand, remember, God knows what he's doing. Trust in the midst of uncertainty. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to know that he is in control. And in that divine control, you can rest, surrendering your worries to God, knowing that his wisdom goes beyond what you can see. This brings incredible peace. That's why, when you face moments of doubt or confusion, remember this verse. God's judgments are unfathomable, his ways unsearchable, but his wisdom is perfect. He sees beyond what you can see, and even if you don't understand every step of the way, you can trust that God has a perfect plan guiding everything toward his purpose for you. Number 13. Isaiah 40 verse 28 says, Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. Have you ever felt completely exhausted, as if you couldn't go on? Surely we've all had those moments, but this verse offers us profound comfort. God, the creator of everything, never grows tired. He has no limits. While we, with our limited strength, reach the end of our capacity, he remains tireless, always present, ready to give us the energy and power we need. God is eternal. He is not bound by time as we are. We live trapped in days and nights, but he is outside that chain, beyond what time imposes on us. We age, we grow weary, but he remains the same, immortal, unchanging. And this has a profound impact. If God is eternal, then his power never diminishes, no matter how much time passes. And that gives us the certainty that we can always rely on him. He is the creator of everything, from the farthest corners of the earth to the smallest details of our lives. If he created the universe with his power, imagine how much more he can handle our worries and difficulties. Sometimes circumstances seem overwhelming, but when we remember that the same God who made everything is with us, our perspective changes. And the most amazing thing is that God never grows tired or weary. While we struggle with our limitations, he is an inexhaustible source of strength, always willing to give us what we need, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Even when it seems we can't go on, God is our constant strength. God also has unfathomable understanding. There are so many things we don't understand, so many unanswered questions, but God knows them all. He sees the whole picture, while we only see fragments. This invites us to humility. We don't need to understand everything because He does. Trusting in His infinite wisdom gives us peace amid uncertainty. Those moments when we feel like nothing makes sense are precisely when we need to remember who God is. The eternal God, the creator of the ends of the earth, whose wisdom and ways are perfect, even though sometimes incomprehensible to us. Knowing this gives us comfort because God never leaves us alone. He is working and guiding us at all times, even when circumstances seem uncertain. In a world where everything seems to change and our lives often feel out of control, God's omnipresence and omnipotence bring us peace. He is everywhere, seeing everything. There is no place or situation where He is not present, and that means nothing is beyond His reach. When we rest in this truth, we can let go of anxiety, fully trusting in His plan. This verse also invites us to reflect on how we perceive God. Sometimes we limit Him by seeing Him only through our human perspective, forgetting His vastness. But remembering His greatness renews our spiritual strength. We stop seeing difficulties as insurmountable barriers and start seeing them as opportunities for Him to display His power and wisdom in our lives. So, when you feel exhausted, when things don't make sense, remember, God is eternal, tireless, and His wisdom is unfathomable. He is in control, even when we don't understand, and in that knowledge, we can find peace and rest, knowing that He never grows tired of holding us up. Number 14. Psalm 145, verse 17. The Lord is righteous in all His ways and faithful in all His acts. When we think about God, we often see Him as either righteous or kind, but sometimes we forget that He is both at the same time, in perfect harmony. What's amazing about this is that there's no conflict in His nature. God's righteousness and kindness work together seamlessly, shaping how He relates to us and how He governs the universe. God's righteousness is not just a concept. It's the absolute standard of what is right. God doesn't need to conform to an external moral code. He is the moral code. Saying that God is righteous means that everything He does is upright, pure, and correct. Every decision He makes, every judgment He delivers, is perfect. Sometimes this is hard to see in a world full of injustices, but the truth is that even when things seem unfair from our limited perspective, God is acting righteously. Let us remember that God is faithful to His promises, and His righteousness ensures He will fulfill all He has said. This is where God's kindness comes into play. His kindness is not just human goodness. It is infinite and perfect goodness. God shows His kindness in countless ways. In creation, in our daily blessings, in the air we breathe. Everything God does is filled with care, love, and compassion. Even more, divine grace is a beautiful manifestation of this kindness. God gives us far more than we deserve and is always working for our good, even when we can't see or understand it. This combination of righteousness and kindness allows us to fully trust Him, even when life doesn't make sense. In those moments of chaos, or when we feel surrounded by injustice, we can remember that God is in control. He remains righteous and kind, and is working in ways we cannot see. Nothing escapes His notice. Every situation, every challenge, is under His dominion, and He will work it out for our good. But what happens when we face situations we simply don't understand? When we suffer, and God's justice seems distant, how do we respond? This is where we must remember a key truth. Our perspective is limited. We see only a part of the picture, but God sees it all. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end. And although we may not always understand why things happen, we can trust that God is righteous, even in the midst of pain. His justice is not indifferent to our suffering. Sometimes God allows us to go through trials to strengthen and purify us, but He always does so with a heart full of kindness and compassion. In the midst of trials, we can also rely on God's kindness. It's not that He has abandoned us. God is present in every moment of pain, caring for us, guiding us. His kindness doesn't vanish during difficult times. Instead, it becomes even more evident. It's easy to see God's kindness on sunny days, but it's during the storm that His compassion and care shine brightest. He knows our weaknesses and walks with us every step of the way. So, how do we live in light of God's righteousness and kindness? First, by recognizing that God is always faithful. No matter what we face, God doesn't change. His character is immutable, meaning we can always trust that He will act with righteousness and kindness in any situation. In our relationships and decisions, we should reflect that same righteousness and kindness, being just to others and showing compassion, just as God does with us. And if you ever doubt or wonder how God's kindness can coexist with a world full of injustice, remember that God sees beyond what you can see. His plan is bigger, broader, deeper. His righteousness and kindness never fail, and when we understand this, our faith is strengthened, and we find peace in the midst of the storm, knowing that in the end, God will always be righteous and kind, just as He has promised. As we conclude this journey through Scripture, an unshakable truth emerges. God has a sovereign and perfect plan for each of us. No matter how many plans we make, how many obstacles we face, or how often we feel lost, we can be confident that His purpose will prevail. Everything we go through, the good and the hard, has a greater purpose within His plan. This invites us to live with confidence, knowing that, even when we don't understand the why or the how, God is in control. It's crucial that when we face life's trials and challenges, we commit our ways to the Lord, trusting that He will act according to His will. His plan for us is filled with hope, and even when we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, we can rest knowing that God is always working. God's love and kindness manifest even in the darkest trials, reminding us that we are not alone. I want to invite you to reflect on everything you've heard today. God has chosen you, predestined you for an eternal purpose, and that purpose is greater than we can imagine. Live with the confidence that God is in control. Now, if this message has resonated with you, I want to invite you to share this video with those who need to hear these words of hope. And if you haven't already, subscribe so we can continue deepening our understanding of God's Word together. May God bless you, and always remember, His purpose will prevail. If you've made it to the end of this video, you are someone who is dedicated and committed to spiritual growth and drawing closer to God. The fact that you've stayed until the end shows your determination to absorb knowledge and apply it to your life. Keep seeking wisdom and working to strengthen your faith and your relationship with God. Remember, learning and drawing closer to God is a continuous and rewarding journey. My videos help people of all ages draw closer to God, rediscovering forgotten teachings and delving deeper into divine truths. Comment, "I am closer to God," to let us know you've made it this far and that you're on this faith journey with us. Thank you for joining me today on Mastery in Faith. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Here are 2 videos that you'll surely find interesting. Click on either one to delve deeper into these topics and strengthen your spiritual life. Let's continue seeking wisdom, peace, and understanding together. May God bless you, and see you next time.